The maritime aspects of our interests and concerns must not be underestimated. That interdependence is both a stabilizer and at the same time a vulnerability. Cumulatively, the world is witnessing more competition and less compacts. The needle has shifted towards an intersection of interests and away from the promise of cooperation. It is driven by the weaponization of everything, with less inhibition to use available tools. Now, all nations face these predicaments, but while a majority of them are struggling to cope or busy defending their interests, India has to strategize, and India has to continue rising amid such volatility. Friends, the challenge for analysts and practitioners alike is to accurately read this complex and evolving landscape. Only then can we figure out how best India can calculate and respond. Now, this is by no means a defensive stance. We have to safeguard our interests and yet continuously advance up the global hierarchy. We have to de-risk our exposures and engagements and yet take risks when necessary. We have to appreciate that interdependence is both a stabilizer and at the same time a vulnerability. And the world is all about being on the positive side of that ledger. From India's perspective, three driving forces of demand, of demographics, and of data will propel its rise. While this is naturally a domestic agenda, the foreign policy implications are to weigh the pros and cons of our choices. Not just that, indeed to maximize the freedom of choice itself. Along with that, we have to create the ideas, the concepts, the terminology, the explanations, and the narratives for the journey towards 2047. This is what awaits the SIS of the future. Now, every domain has its own truisms and fundamentals. Even as we look ahead, it is essential to appreciate the lessons of the past. And few are better placed to undertake that exercise than an SIS which is entering its 8th decade. Probably the most obvious of them is the importance of realism and the significance of national capabilities. Both were underestimated in the early decades after independence, with costs and consequences that we all know well. Our goodwill towards neighbors cannot presume that they necessarily reciprocate that sentiment. The value of territory and its strategic implications must never be taken lightly. The defense of our boundaries needs the requisite infrastructure, not just declarations of intent. If nations have permanent interests, then adjusting policy to global shifts must be accepted as a necessity. These learnings have been taken into account by policy formulation in the last decade. Now, allow me, in addition, to highlight 10 particular dimensions of change that we have also seen in the same period. 1. Relationships need to be continuously tended, not episodically addressed. That is why we see a more intense diplomacy and a more high-profile one within the subcontinent itself and with the Gulf, ASEAN, Central Asia, and major powers. Some bilateral visits have actually taken place after decades, after a gap of decades. 2. In our own region, we have to ourselves underwrite the infrastructure for cooperation if it is to be proofed against political volatility. This is the essence of neighborhood first policy. India has to be the go-to option in any crisis for the entire subcontinent. 3. The maritime aspects of our interests and concerns must not be underestimated. It is not just past history. It continued till the first decade of this century. That is why we now have the Sagar and the Mahasagar outlook. 4. The strategic diminishing of India as a result of the partition has to be overcome, and it has to be done by reaching out to the extended neighborhoods. This explains the Act East, the Link West, the C5+1, and the Focus Africa initiatives. 5. Even as we optimize our positioning among major powers, the constituency of the developing world should be continuously cultivated. Therefore, India proposed the Voice of the Global South summits and undertook the Vaccine Maitri initiative. 6. As our economy grows, so too do our responsibilities and in fact the world's expectations of India. That is why we have emerged as a regular first responder and a reliable development partner with projects today in 78 nations across various continents. 7. Recognizing that we have forged strong partnerships with many nations without making any an exclusive one, our preferred method of expanding cooperation is and will be through agenda-based platforms. Therefore, the membership of the Quad, of the BRICS, of the SCO, of the I2U2, amongst others. 8. Re-engineering connectivity is today vital. Increasing our options through engagement in multiple directions is in progress. We can see that with the IMEC, the North-South Transport Corridor, the Trilateral Highway, the polar routes, among others. 9. A nation's profile is also judged by the power of its ideas. In recent years, we have initiated the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the Global Biofuel Alliance, the International Big Cat Alliance, etc. Or given a global thrust to yoga and wellness, to millets and nutrition, or to sustainable lifestyles. What may look ambitious today, like one sun, one world, one grid, could actually be a reality not that far away. And 10. Overall, India must operate in a multipolar environment while itself preparing to emerge as a pole. That is why multi-alignment serves it well right now, and the goal of becoming a leading power is a natural one for the future. And preparations must commence now to create a global footprint, a task that probably will take 2 generations. No region is too far away anymore. No region is too far away anymore to engage for Indian diplomacy. And you can see that whether it is the Nordics or the FIPIC involving Pacific Islands, West Africa, CARICOM or CELAC. Friends, there is a strong and direct connection between the internal dynamics of any nation and its external manifestations. The concept of comprehensive national power has not only gained greater acceptance, but also serves as a key national security objective. Many of our preferences and initiatives are decided keeping it in mind. In engaging the world, it is also essential that we factor in the demands of the real economy and the views of the real society. This is not always the case in the past, where policy preferences were sometimes at odds with socio-economic sentiments of our society. Especially in this day and age, we cannot be impervious to public opinion. Developing and projecting our national personality on the world stage is also critical, as we occupy a more prominent place. After all, we are a civilizational state, and the quest for modernity and progress must be harmonized with our traditions and culture. So let me say this. The SIS has been in the forefront of developing India's diplomatic capabilities for 7 decades now. This has been both an intellectual endeavor as well as being a training ground. It has served as an inspiration for the proliferation of international relations studies in the rest of the country. Today, it must help shoulder the responsibility of preparing India to enter a higher orbit and emerging as a leading power. We need the concepts, the strategies, and the terminology to facilitate that journey. Auditing our performance and illustrating it with case studies is enormously helpful. How to debate within and how to disseminate beyond is a task that SIS must pursue vigorously. As India globalizes, public interest about the world will also grow commensurately. The power of analysis and of articulation must address that societal need as well.